Hello Ekans, this video is just going to be a fun video. We're going to be choosing the best DPS for every single element in Genshin Impact. We're going to go through every single element and then choose a couple of contenders and then finally decide which of them is going to be the best DPS representing this element. Before we proceed though, I just want to make a couple of things clear because I did base this video around them. Those are going to be the assumptions we're going to be going on for the rest of the video, so make sure you see them. First of all, the characters are all going to be considered low constellations, mostly like C0, but if it's like C1, C2, that's fine, but this is going to be the maximum. If a character is only good at like C4, C6, that's not really going to matter in this video. We're mostly considering low constellations, C0, C1, C2 maximum. The second thing is that, I don't know how to explain it, but the damage numbers need to be in the element, or at least most of them, not all of them obviously, but a good percentage of them needs to be on the actual elements. And we're going to see examples for that later in the video, but if a character is like, let's say Anemo, but he doesn't deal Anemo damage, then that's not really a good representation for Anemo DPSs. That's kind of what I mean. Again, it doesn't need to be like all of his damage needs to be on that element. It can be like physical, some mixed elements, I don't care. But if he deals like a very small percentage of the damage in the actual element he is, then I wouldn't really say he's a good representation for the element, and I'll probably go for another character. And then finally, if the two other requirements are clear, the things I'm going to go for are obviously the damage numbers and the ease to play too. It's not going to be like pure damage competition. If a character can deal more damage, but it's in very like specific scenarios with very specific teammates and this clunky playstyle and stuff like that, I'll probably won't go for him. So high damage numbers are obviously a factor. It's a big factor. It's like the biggest factor, but they're not going to be the only factor. There are other factors that can play out too in this video. So yeah, hopefully this is all cleared. Now let's begin with the first element. All right, so starting off with Anemo, I think the main contenders we have for Anemo are going to be Zhao, Scaramouche, and then finally Chaska. Those are probably the main DPSs we have for Anemo right now. Now if I had to pick between those three, I'll probably go for Chaska. I think Chaska just deals more damage than the rest of the two. So when it comes to like pure damage numbers, Chaska is probably a better DPS. The only problem is, as I was saying before, I just don't feel like Chaska is a good representation for the Anemo element because she simply does not really deal that much Anemo damage. Most of her damage is just going to be like other elements mixed with Anemo. Now I know this is kind of a special case because the whole Anemo element in general is made around like the swirls and like taking up other elements and stuff like that, but I still like, I don't know, I'm just not comfortable with calling Chaska the best Anemo DPS because she simply does not really deal that much Anemo damage. So I do recognize she deals the most damage, but I don't think she's the best Anemo DPS. I don't think she's a good representation for Anemo. So I'd have to go with either Zhao or Scaramouche. Between them, I think Zhao just deals more damage in general, especially with his latest teams. You know, a good like Zhao Shan Yun team or Zhao with Farzan and stuff like that. I think that's probably going to be the best representation for an Anemo DPS in my opinion, especially because most of its teams are going to be like mono Anemo, stuff like that. So in my opinion, I think Zhao is going to be the best Anemo DPS. Tell me what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Chaska deserves that spot or no? Now, moving on to the Geo elements, I don't really think there's that much competition here. I think there are only two contenders that really matter. I think it's either Itto or Navia. And if we look between them, I think Navia really wins everything. The higher damage, and even her teams are kind of simpler. She's also simpler to build. So I think I'll just give it to Navia. I think Navia is probably the best Geo DPS you can have that actually deals Geo damage. Her teams might not be like fully Geo focused, but usually you do want to play her with at least one Geo, so she's fine in that regard. Now, moving on to Pyro, which is probably one of the most fierce competitions. The contenders I picked are going to be like the basic three, I think, which are Hu Tao, Arlecchino, and finally the new Muika. The thing is, all of these really deal close damage. If we had to rank them, I think Hu Tao probably deals the least damage out of these, then Arlecchino, and then finally Muika in best case scenarios for each of them, obviously. So damage numbers are not going to be like a huge difference here. So we have to look at other things. If you look at the damage percentage they deal, I think all of them are basically the same thing too. All of them just deal Pyro damage. All of them do rely on some reactions too, so this is not really a difference between them. They either do vaporize and stuff like that. If you go to their teams, I think it's also pretty close in general. All of them need a Hydra enabler and stuff like that, so none of them really takes that like full Pyro approach. I think the only difference that I'm going to choose based around between them is going to be the clunkiness of them, like flexibility and ease to play. I think Hu Tao automatically gets disqualified if we take that into account because she's a bit clunky to play. We all know that. We stay with Arlecchino Arlecchino and Moika. In terms of actual playstyle, I think they're both not really that clunky, but Arlecchino's teams are probably a little bit more versatile than Moika's teams, since she doesn't really need like Natlan specific characters and stuff like that. So Arlecchino wins in that regard. Moika does have a very specific advantage though in this, which I don't think any character is gonna have in this video, is that she's the actual Pyro Archon, the literal Pyro Archon. So I think that gives her a point, in my opinion at least. There are no DPS in the game that are the Archon for their elements, and since she's the Pyro Archon, I think she honestly deserves to have like the representation of Pyro, even though her teams are a little clunky. So if she wasn't the Pyro Archon, I'd probably just go for Arlecchino in terms of being like a pure DPS, but this comes down to her being the Pyro Archon and she wants characters from the Pyro land to be on her team. So I think in general she might be the better representation for Pyro in general, at least for me. She also deals a little bit more damage than Arlecchino in terms of like having their best teams. So yeah, I think I'll go for Moika for being the best DPS for Pyro. I do understand this is kind of a fierce competition too though, so let me know your opinions in the comments for this one too. Alright, now moving on to Cryo. The two contenders I picked are going to be either Ayaka or Risley. I don't really think any other characters really come close between them, so I'll just stick with those. Now between them, I think they deal like kind of similar numbers of damage if we average them for like their average teams. In best case scenarios for like the best teams, and if Cryo was the meta right now, I'd probably think Ayaka would take the lead. She has the potential to deal more damage if you can like time in her bursts pretty well, but also it's not going to be a huge difference, I think. I haven't really played or visited Ayaka in a long while, so yeah, but I do remember she's fairly clunky though to play. If you miss her burst, you're definitely missing out on a huge number of damage. If you hit it, she might deal more damage, but in general, yeah. I feel like Risley is just much easier to play with decent numbers of damage too. So in my opinion, I would go for Risley as the best Cryo DPS we have right now. If I had to main a DPS and the DPS needs to be Cryo, I'll probably just go for Risley, at least at this point in the game. Now moving on to Hydro, I'd also wanted to pick only two contenders to not overcomplicate it. So I picked fairly new characters, which are Nuviet and Milani. Those two are gonna have much higher damage numbers than the rest of the Hydro characters, so I didn't even bother having other Hydro DPSs right here. Now between them, I think the damage numbers are going to be fairly similar too. Best case scenarios, Milani might deal a little more damage than Nuviet, but she's also, as I said before, much more clunky to play. Nuviet is much more easier to play in my opinion, especially if you have him C1, and his teams are much more forgiving than Milani's. Also, I think he is a better representation for Hydra in general. He works well with the Hydra Archon for Arena, for example. He does have like mono Hydra teams and stuff like that. He's also much easier to play with almost similar damage numbers, so I think I'd go with Nuviet for the best Hydro DPS we have right now. I do acknowledge Milani does have higher damage though in some cases, but she also needs Vaporize, so this kind of messes with like the pure Hydro representation stuff. So yeah, I think I'd just go with Nuviet for the best DPS for Hydro. Now moving on to Electro, I think I'll pick three contenders this time. They're going to be Keqing, Xinu, and Claran. I think Xinu and Keqing are going to be pretty similar in terms of level, but Claran is going to have much higher damage. I think she's also just easier to play and does have like higher damage than both of them in general. Also her teams are better, and I think she's a better representation for Electro since she deals a lot of like good Electro numbers on herself. So yeah, I think honestly Claran just wins everything. So yeah, obviously I'll just go for Claran. I think she is no doubtedly the best representation for Electro mid DPS. And now finally moving on to the last element, which is Dendro. We didn't even have Dendro as a playable element at the beginning of the game, but right now we do have a couple of interesting Dendro characters. If we're talking about main DPSs though, I think the competition is mainly between two right now, which are going to be Kinish and Alhaitham. Now in terms of like pure damage numbers, I do think Alhaitham deals a little more damage, at least in the average team, than Kinish. But as I was saying before, Alhaitham relies super heavily on just reactions. Without having those reactions, Alhaitham's damage is not going to be comparable to Kinish. I think Kinish just deals more like green Dendro numbers. He does rely on like burn-in reactions a little bit, so that's fair, I think. But it's nowhere as close as Alhaitham. Alhaitham's damage, a lot of times it's not even him dealing damage. It's just like all of his team, and you don't really see that many like green numbers, you know. So I think Kinish is going to be a better representation for a Dendro main DPS. I think I'll go for Kinish in that one. I'll just pick Kinish. So yeah, this is our final list of the best DPSs. We got Xiao, Navia, Moika, Risley, Neviette, Florand, and finally Kinnish. In my personal opinion, I think if I think for a main DPS for any of these elements, I would think of these characters. Now, as I said before, I understand this is not like a final, you know, objective ranking. So I would love to hear your guys' opinions in the comments. Tell me your lists, maybe the reasons why, if you have some controversial picks. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.